Good afternoon, and my apologies for starting or running a few minutes late. That's how today's panned out. My name is Lavinia, and I'm joined by Yasmin, our social media manager, and Samara, our training manager, from the M Word and emotional problem solving combined. It's always lovely to have you both, although I know, Yasmin, technically you're under both, aren't you? A bit here, a bit there.
Yeah.
So today, ladies, last week we were talking about what's it like before we get screened for autism, ADHD, and PDA. And today we wanted to kind of complete that journey of thinking about what happens going through the process, but also the after experience and when you look back. So who wants to kick off first?
Neither of you. Well, I mean, my screening wasn't an official screening. It was me sat in my kitchen and you going, go on, you take it. We'll see what happens, because we already knew that it was, a definite. So you said sit through it and tell me your opinion of it. So I wasn't really sitting it to get answers. It was more to like, what's this about then? And I was what, 18, 19 when I took it, and I was still having to turn to you every couple of questions and go, sorry, what does that mean? That makes no sense, or that's not specified enough. Does it mean this or does it mean this? And it's not a very up-to-date system, really, is it?
It's also kind of accentuates how literal we are as autistic individuals when you're answering questions on a screening form, doesn't it? What about you, Samara? What did you find?
I think because I kind of knew what the outcome was going to be after speaking with you, but I was still quite shocked by the results.
Right.
And it took a little bit of time after the assessment to kind of have all the questions answered and kind of let it sink in.
So my own personal experience was I trotted off thinking I was going for a dyslexia assessment with Surrey, and at the time I wasn't working within CAM's autism service at that point. So off I toddled. In fact, I was working for Safe Haven in Surrey, and I had the pleasure of setting up the service in Woking. And things were really not going right, and I was getting very frustrated with my lecturers with my PhD. And I'd gone to the student support service, knowing what I'd known with my masters, and thought, you know what, there seems to be a rather interesting similarity with my exams at O-level and Highers, and then going forward for my degree, and then going forward for my master's. So there's something here that needs to be investigated. And I had spoken with my manager, who had referred me to the adult services, and because it was in-house, technically I was working, I didn't have to wait for a very long period of time. I was able to be seen a little bit quicker, and literally went in to go in thinking I was doing a dyslexia assessment, which I did do, but the psychologist who was screening me said, actually, there are other indicators here that I need to kind of just rule out. And that's what then helped me understand actually there was a bit more to it than just dyslexia. There was definitely sensory processing. The auditory processing was humongous for me, and the very short-term memory. I can think of something and it's obliterated within seconds, which was my biggest complaint. I just couldn't retain information. Therefore, writing things down was absolutely vital. Otherwise, I could not retain it. And even if I did retain the information long enough to kind of think about it, I could see it and it would look like I was looking at it with fresh eyes all over again. It just wasn't going in. It wasn't making sense. No matter how pretty I'd coloured it with, coloured pens, no matter how much I bulleted, pointed, it just wasn't going in. It was very frustrating. And so then I had to go back and complete a more formal assessment, and that's when I was told that I had autism and ADHD. The PDA is an interesting one because obviously at that point, when I entered the autism service, they didn't do PDA. We just knew that we had a lot of young people who were experiencing crippling anxiety, but other than the RCADs, there was nothing really that could be offered as an explanation. And it wasn't until I started working extensively across CAM services that I began to realise that actually there was a bigger problem. There was something else going on that wasn't being given the same credence or the same consideration. And so as I sort of moved around the services and counties, I picked up different screening questionnaires, and one of the most interesting ones I found was the anger assessment, because that seemed to be the most notable one that supported some of the RCADs, but also the impulsivity and in ADHD and the PDA questionnaire, which I eventually found, obviously through the work with Professor Newson, and then everything began to make a lot more sense with regards to PDA. So it's interesting how all our journeys have been different, but also for Yasmin, by that time I was in the autism service. So for me, I was able to do a lot of that with one of my clinicians. So although she says she has the fun of sitting at a kitchen table and doing hers, we'd already done it 3 years before from a clinical perspective. So it was just interesting to see what her perspective was on it. And it was interesting because, like she says, it's that this doesn't make any sense, but it's that very literal understanding this doesn't make any sense. And, invoked quite a bit of humor with it. I seem to remember we would be laughing about, how does this make sense? This isn't the right.
It was interesting because there were some questions and I would answer it thinking, yeah, that's the right answer because, it's about me. And I'd say, oh, I'm going to tick this one. And you went, and I'm like, what? Have you got something to argue with that? Because I think that's true. And you go, no, I don't think that one's quite right. So,
Yes, and it's very much about our perceptions, isn't there, about how we cope with things. So if we think about, the difficulties we've had about attending school or doing subjects or doing homework or doing exams, there's an internal perception, but there's also external perceptions from others about how they see us coping. Or, like I'll give you a classic example. My mother always used to complain about, you're always sulking. Yasmin, on the other hand, turns around and says, you're looking a bit gormless.
You also
and which one is it? Yeah, there is I think my mum really struggled with the understanding about sulking. I think hers was more about a repeat from her childhood. Quite often it's quite difficult to work out what we're doing if we don't understand what it looks like or what it feels like. And I know that sometimes when we sulk, it's because we're cross, we can't get our own way. Whereas sometimes we're looking gormless because we're in another planet called planet Lavinia, where we're trying to think and process, and it's not working very well with people telling us we're gormless.
Sorry, all I can think of is that Wurzel Gummidge scene. I'm going to go into a sulk now, and he goes and sits on the hay bale, and it's just, don't talk to me, I'm sulking, and it's like, okay. It's not that severe. But when you're talking about school attendance, so obviously I was recently trying to find my GCSE results, and we got a letter from my secondary school saying we really need to talk about Yasmin's attendance. It's really bad. It was 77.3%. That's actually quite good. That's over halfway. I don't know what they were complaining about. Especially as when I went to college, my percentage went from 77.3 to like 43 something. That's bad. That's under halfway. And so I'm sat there going, sorry, the school's saying my attendance is really, really bad. That's nearly 80%. What are they complaining about? I didn't get it, but apparently that's bad attendance.
I've had clients who've told me that their child has had over 80% attendance, but that's been bad. It is appalling, isn't it? So how many of us thought about the possibility we might be on the autistic spectrum before we got screened?
I hadn't really thought about autism. I definitely thought about ADHD and kind of like accepted that myself, that I definitely had ADHD. But I'd never really considered autism at all. But I think like since having the assessment, I kind of realized a lot of what I've done in my life has been more associated with autism, and I realized how much I must have masked everything. And since the assessment, I've kind of let that go a lot, and I don't seem to mask as much at all. And then I start thinking to myself like, oh, you're acting quite autistic.
Okay. Yasmin, what do you think?
I'm the other way around, because even when I was like in primary school and I didn't know what autistic was and we didn't really talk about it, it was just part of me. Like the behaviors were part of me that we kind of explained off as I was an only child. I didn't have many friends. I unfortunately had a turbulent relationship with my biological father. So I think we kind of put it more as it was emotional kind of trauma, really, but it wasn't. It's the ADHD that really surprised me, because I think it's because, again, it's so forced down your throat. Somebody who has ADHD, they're bouncing off the walls all the time. They can't sit still, and it's like, I can do those things, so that's not me. That's fine, whatever. And then when you get the letter back going, oh yeah, you've got ADHD, it's like, oh, have I? Oh, okay. I guess that's what's going on then.
I think there's a very interesting mix match, which I've had 2 cases in the last week of assessments where a young person, if you were to screen them through Snap tool as a tool, they would fail abysmally on the hyperactivity and the impulsivity, but intriguingly, they would score 6 out of 6 on the adult form. Now, how is that possible? Because the adult form recognizes that adults are not going to be leaping from sofa to bookcase to clambering up and down trees. There might be a very small minority who might still do that. However, adults generally don't do that. And even when they are seen to be sitting, they are learning that actually it's not acceptable to keep bouncing and moving around. You do have to have some decorum of etiquette about sitting still for a few moments. But if you watch their leg, it's bouncing up and down. If you watch what they're doing with their fingers, they're fiddling, or they're stimming with twiddling their hair, or fiddling with something in their pocket, or men using change in their pockets is always one that I can remember very well indeed. So there is that interesting, hang on a minute, how is it that they fail abysmally on the ADHD with, say, for example, the SNAP score, and yet would score very highly on the adult? And the other thing that I'm finding a little bit disconcerting is that more recently, there's an awful lot of parents having to send their children through what's known as a QB test. And effectively, it looks like I can't remember the full word for it, but it's like this graphic where there's just loads of dots. And if it's below, they're not scoring with ADHD. And if it's above, they're deemed to be scoring. But we've already found that to be absolutely not 100%, not anywhere near 100%, when you've quite clearly got a young person who is scoring very highly on the inattention, the hyperactivity, and the impulsivity, and yet failing this QB test, which has now been brought in as an added measure as to whether or not you pass the NHS, threshold for ADHD. And that's actually really, really worrying from my perspective, because actually, if you're ruling that out and insisting that a young person hasn't got anything like that, and yet we know through just, the mental health assessment and the initial screening using, say, for example, the SNAP, if that's not being picked up, then effectively we are always going to have a young person having bits that are missed that is absolutely crucial to their well-being of being identified. And with the best will in the world, we three have all experienced that. It's all been missed. And yes, we're at a disadvantage in that we're not supporting the males population, but we also have males in our lives that we are acutely aware that have ADHD as part of their makeup. And, we are alongside or are the bearer of those males. So it's really quite concerning that it's still being missed, but also there are tools being put in place that are deemed to be more than sufficient to show ADHD, when in actual fact it's still failing, if not even more so. If we think about how we feel now that we've had a few days, weeks, months, what's the general perception?
I don't really think anything's changed, to be honest.
No?
No, I feel the same. I'm slightly more aware of when things are happening, but I think that's just because the older I seem to be getting, the more forgetful I seem to be getting. Like, I used to only maybe once a week put something down and forget where I've put it. Now it's like every couple of hours I've put something down and I can't seem to find it. So I get more aware, and the older I get, the more outlets I'm exposed to, I guess. So it sounds very strange, but I regularly have like TV quotes going off in my head. So I've been exposed to a lot more things. The entire time you were talking about fiddling, I've been singing Born to Hand Jive in my head from Greece because it's just stuck in my head, and I'm like, why? That. So, and I'm very aware of it now. It happens regularly. So I'm always quite aware that I'm with one half of my brain, I am paying attention to what we're doing, but the other half is just having a party, playing elevator music. It's just doing its own thing, and I have to leave it because otherwise I'll get overwhelmed with it and I'm thinking too much about it.
That's quite interesting. So you've got a very active ADHD bit there going on there, haven't you? We have our fan club who's joined us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So what have we got here? We have got, so Sophie's saying that she needed a period afterwards where she needed to process everything and rethink scenarios in my life. It took me a few months to understand everything. Even a year on, I'm still learning and processing things. Yeah. But also then added, my mum answered my questions different than I did too, but I was answering them considering my masking. So say you're chatty in social situations, I would say sometimes because I am, if I'm masking, but actually I'm dying inside. Can you guys relate to that?
That's the stupid thing with those questions, because sometimes the examples they give for the level, I'm straddling two camps where it's like, this part of this sentence is what I do, but this part is also what I do, and you can only select one. It's like doing that paperwork for the college course. Do you have a learning difficulty? Autism, dyslexia, Erlin, ADHD. Yes, I have all of them. Oh no, you can only select one. Well, I've still got the other ones. So you said just select the autism because that's the most important one, and I'm like, but I've still got the dyslexia. So if they suddenly say, why can't you spell? Well, I have dyslexia. You just wouldn't let me put it down. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Samara?
I think like one big thing that comes from like having a diagnosis and, well, you know, having the assessment is you can finally like start to learn to accept yourself and actually like was said about the social situations, you know, I'm one of those people, unfortunately, but it's something that I've learned I don't need to do anymore. I was one of those people who would probably drink a bit more than I should do to just feel even comfortable. Like I would drink before I went out because I thought I can't even say hello to someone and actually feel comfortable, even if it's friends. And just you need to get to that state where you're not worried about what people are thinking about you. And but like since knowing a bit more about myself, I can I actually will just say how I'm feeling to people. Like I might say, oh, do you know, I'm feeling a bit awkward,
Yeah,
rather
yeah,
than
yeah.
trying to hide it.
Yeah. So this is a comment from Sophie again, who said, I didn't really consider autism because I only knew it as the typical media portrayal, i.e. Sheldon Copper type. But now I know more about it, it's so obvious. Now this is really interesting because you know how so many people are wanting us to be very PC correct. It's very much about this understanding that we're not allowed to segment the phrases high functioning or low functioning autism. We're not allowed to suggest that there's Asperger's, i.e. high functioning, or low functioning. So it's really quite difficult because the Sheldon Coopers are very much that Asperger's end. You know, they're very literal, very rigid. It's very factual. I mean, he's just so in his element with everything is scientifically based, isn't it? You know, he can prove it maths wise, science wise. But that doesn't mean it's the majority. And I think the beauty about the autism spectrum is that we're beginning to understand that it's so wide and so varied. And the majority are not like Sheldon Cooper, the majority are like we are. And there are so many different sort of like strands to our autistic persona, especially when you add in the elements of ADHD and PDA. So I think that's quite interesting. Just to support you, Yasmin.
No, it was stupid. So stupid.
But isn't that a reiteration of this is how so many professionals within statutory agencies do? It's what is the thing, and actually we've got often a combination, and
No, I
that's
mean,
quite difficult.
because I'm in the autism community, I managed to put in my personal statement that I wasn't happy with how we were represented in media. So I was writing and I was comparing shows, and I was like, you know, I don't like the way we've been, because that's the thing. People seem to think you're either really, really smart or you're really, really stupid if you're on the spectrum. There is no in between. And
Yeah.
it's like, but I'm just a normal person. Like I'm normal. You know, I shop at Tesco's. I have a job where I work from. I'm a normal person, but I'm not either of those two things. And so then I have people go, "Well, you can't possibly be autistic," and it's like, who said? I didn't say that. You said that.
Yes, I had a consultant psychiatrist who could not believe when I said that I was on the autistic spectrum, that she was on the phone within minutes of finishing the meeting, and she just kept ringing me until I answered the phone. And I thought it was something really serious about the client we'd been both discussing. And she said, there's no way that you're autistic. I screen people. There is no way you're autistic. And I said, how on earth have you come to that conclusion? And she was very clear. She said, you're very articulate. You hold good eye contact. And I said, I'll stop you right there. I'm in my 50s. Why would I not be? I've learned to mimic. Do you not understand this about autism? And actually, when you've been doing things for a very long time, you are able to do things in a way, it's called masking. And I couldn't believe I was having to say this to a very experienced psychiatrist who more concerning was doing screening several times a week, and dismissing people if they had good eye contact, dismissing people if they were articulate. And yet when you think about the combination of autism and ADHD, the ADHD does generally help us a bit better than just pure autism in being able to engage with others. But that is regularly dismissed. And I think as well, this is that real poor understanding around how chronic masking is.
Well, the thing is that affects people in the autistic community as well, because when I was at school, I got told by a girl in my friendship group, "You're not autistic, I'm autistic. You can't possibly be autistic because you're okay with people touching you." And I'm like, because it's not socially acceptable to go, "If you continue touching me, I'm going to punch you in the mouth." You can't say things like that. But on the inside, I'm like, "Get off me. Get off. Oh, I don't stop touch." But because I was okay with it, I couldn't possibly. And she was really, for years, she would just constantly go, "You're not autistic. You're not autistic." And I'm like, okay, but you're a version of autistic. I'm another, and she just would not have it. Would not have it. And I'm like, how am I, especially for people who are only just joining the community now, whether it's for themselves or because they've got children, how are you supposed to get comfortable in a community that was built to help support you if there are people gatekeeping when it's none of their business? It's supposed to be a community that helps support, nurture, provide more information. That's great. But when you've got somebody saying you can't possibly have this or your child can't possibly be this, it's like, well, what's the point? Where are you supposed to go at that point?
Sophie's adding to this one as well. I hate that when people invalidate your diagnosis. You're normal. There's nothing wrong with you. That's because I've learned how to mask and mimic everyone around me. They don't see that I had a meltdown before we left. All the social burnout afterwards. Oh my goodness, absolutely. And I think that's quite interesting as well, isn't it? Because people don't see every moment of our lives, and they definitely cannot hear what we think or say to ourselves in that internal bit, do they? Like this, having to have the energy to go out and socialize with people. Samara, you've said, okay, and I used to have to get alcohol to physically get myself through the outside world, and I know that I had to always think like a nurse before I could open my mouth to have a conversation, and it used to drive me insane because inside I would be shaking, thinking I can't do this, and frantically having this internal argument about I don't know what to say, and then thinking, how would I do it if I was with a client? And it must have sounded like I was just panting talking to clients, when in actual fact I was just trying to survive outside. And then I would get home, and that recovery process would happen straight away by me turning about with my dogs, going straight out to walk the dogs, in the understanding that people wouldn't accost me if I was walking with my dogs. You might bump into other dog walkers, but generally, if you have dogs, people who didn't have dogs didn't want to meet up with you and have a chin wag. You could just be on your own and just come back down. And of course, at that time, I had no real understanding of how powerful my processing was with walking the dogs for my ADHD. It was the only time I could really think about things. But people don't see all of that, do they? Well, what about in the supermarkets? Yasmin and I, when we go once a week, we're both getting quite stressed at the moment because for whatever reason, our local Tesco store is out of things. So we now have to, it's quite a draining process, isn't it, Yasmin? We psych ourselves up. We go to Morrison's first, trying to get things. We go to Tesco second, trying to get things. We go to Aldi's third and final. But by the time we've done all that, bearing in mind we go in the evening when there's less people, the lighting's a bit lower, still doesn't work. We still get in the car and we go and walk the dogs, and I don't really enjoy walking the dogs by then because I'm so up here, and Yasmin's just going, I can't do this. We're kind of wrecks by the time we get home, and it's just like, this is insane.
I mean, the thing is, it's getting worse, really, because how do I explain? Because you always go, oh, can't you get it from the other shop? I don't like Morrison's cheese, so I have to go to Tesco's. But cheese in Tesco's is now like a kidney, a house payment. I don't understand. And I always organise my food shop list as the route through the store, right? But they're changing everything, and now Tesco's have decided they don't sell DVDs anymore, which is because apparently I'm old or so, I don't know. And I'm just like, you've ruined my plan now. And then there's people who walk slowly in front of me, and they're clearly in the way. And I'm like, can you just? By that point, I'm just like, no. And I have like this running mantra in my head of like, oh god, it's just I can't do it. And then you're like, oh, do you want me to wait with you? And I'm like, no, just get me out of here. I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to deal with these people. You know what? I won't buy this food item for the week. I'm not going for a hunt for it. Just take me home.
So do you think it's easier now, given the difficulties that like last night was just horrendous, but do you think it's easier now knowing what we know, or would you prefer to kind of not know and just, I don't know, how would you
I mean,
is it better having the understanding or not?
Well, because we've been so open for it for most of my childhood, I don't think it means anything different to me. And I know that there's a very high chance that my children will have ADHD, autism, dyslexia, whatever, Erlin. So they're not going to have to go through that. Is this what I have? We'll kind of start as we mean to go on.
Yeah.
I remember never really liking supermarkets, but I don't know many people who do. And when people say, oh, you don't like it, is it because of the noise? I constantly see these videos on like Facebook of from an autistic child's perspective where it's like this really overwhelming noise. And I don't have that experience. It's not the noise, it's the people. And it's because it's a lot like when you're driving a car on the motorway and there's somebody just sat in that lane and they're in the way and you get annoyed. It's that, but with people. And when they're just so not spatially aware and they're encroaching on my space, and I have this certain bubble around me that if you're in it for too long, it starts getting me overwhelmed, and it just gets higher and higher and higher until it's like, you know what, I can't do any of this anymore. I will come back next week. It's fine.
What about you, Samara?
I think it's definitely something you need to know. Like I look back at my childhood and like my teen years, and I feel like life would have been a lot different had I known. Because the whole time, especially as a child, that feeling different and that feeling like you're not fitting in, or like what's wrong with you all the time, it just leads to anxiety and depression. And if I'd have maybe known back then, and if people had known and made, like, I guess, provisions for me and helped me with it, my life might have been very different.
Yes, I think for me as well, it's the fact that sense of relief of finally I'm not going mad. It's not me being difficult or stupid. It's the fact that actually my whole environment has been wrong for me and I've never been able to be myself. And you've already alluded to that for you as well. And then almost relishing trying to prove my point. And I always knew that I had to fight really hard academically to show that I was as good as, if not better, than my siblings, who were very keen to keep me down at this. You're so stupid, you don't know anything, you're incompetent. I've gone to university more times than they all have put together. And I'm really proud of that fact, that I have shown myself and other people who knew me that actually give the person the right environment and it's amazing what they can achieve. Give the person the wrong environment and look how badly they are failed. Whereas people are very keen to tell you that you're the failure, you're the reason why. And for a young person, that's incredibly crippling, because if you're the problem and you can't change it, what's left? You know, there's no wonder why we have so many young people attempting suicide, because if you can't escape yourself and you are the problem, what are you going to do? You know, but at least if you are then taught it's not you, it's you being in the wrong environment, go to the right environment and actually you'll find that you flourish. You see life very differently. It's a very positive experience. It's like, okay, so there are opportunities where I can astound myself, where I can show that I can do things. And, you know, we've got some amazing young people who have achieved so much, you know, by understanding a little bit more about their autistic presentation. So I'm going to put this because I like this. So being diagnosed and the M word changed my life. My mental health and self-esteem has never been better, and having struggled with my mental health my entire life. I think that's really helpful. And obviously, Yasmin, I'm sure you've seen the comments she's made about an army. So I think it's definitely a positive in learning and understanding about the mental health and the autism presentation. Would you say that your mental health has improved, Samara, from learning about the fact that you are autistic with ADHD, with PDA? Would you say that?
I'd say it definitely has. You know, I'm one of these people who've been on and off antidepressants and anxiety medication, and now I am starting to see that they won't actually be doing anything for me because, you know, there's other problems going on. And as well, like I don't know if anyone else has had this, but I'm someone who has constantly had people say to me stuff like, you know, you're not mentally ill, you don't look mentally ill, or you don't look like this. I actually had an old boss of mine say that, oh, you're not mentally ill because you still put your makeup on every day.
Oh,
Yeah, and at that time I thought, oh, you know, maybe she's right. Like maybe she is right, because yeah, you see other people who are, you know, mentally ill and they're not getting ready, they're not brushing their teeth, they're not, and I'm like, I'm still doing those things, so I must be faking that I'm mentally ill to myself. And then I kind of realized that actually makeup to me, I think, is definitely like a physical mask. I've
yeah.
put makeup on every day since I was about 11 years old. You know, I'm now 30. That's a long time. So
Yeah.
even if I'm sat in the house on my own, I put makeup on.
Yeah. Would you say similar, Yasmin?
I'm the other extreme, I think. Well, I don't want to say I'm one of those. I used to not be one of those people who put makeup on because they're going out, but it depends on what level of going out I'm going out. Because if it's like I'm just going to Tesco's, I can't be asked. But if I'm planning on doing something like unearthing and I'm like, yeah, okay, I better do it today, otherwise I look like death warmed up, it's really bad. If I'm planning on filming TikToks or doing anything that requires my face being on social media, I will put makeup on, which is really bad. But,
I was thinking as well, if you go to work, you generally do as well, don't you?
depends if we're going to work where I'm going to see other people or if we're going
But that's
out.
what I mean. If you no,
If
if
I
you're going
come
to work
into the
with the other
office
people, yeah,
and I know I'm going to see, even if it's just Michelle or Samara, I will put makeup on. If I'm going to the office and I know it's just you and our business manager, I won't bother. I'll probably come in my pajamas if I could, but you know, it depends on who I'm seeing, what I'm doing, which is really bad. But you know, I even put makeup on today because I was like, I've got to go to the hairdresser to talk to her. I can't go. Yeah. So,
That's quite interesting because we've now got an understanding, but that seems to help us a bit more. It feels like, you know, like I know that I can't do day after day after day after day seeing loads of people. I just can't. I'm just going to explode. I have to have time on my own again. I have to be around Monty to kind of just feel normal, which is shocking, but I didn't know that before. So, you know, people would say, come out, do this. And I'd be like, oh, right, I feel I've got to do it because, you know, I don't want to let you down. And then completely have a meltdown or a breakdown, burnout, and then go, what the hell was all that about? You know, whereas now I'm like, hang on a minute, might need to pace myself with all of this.
See, I
You know?
also find... Oh, go on.
No? Go on.
I also find with doing makeup and like getting dressed, if it's for an event, like going to the doctors or something that I know I get nervous about, because it's never in the same environment, if that makes sense. So like, I've been to the doctors loads of times, but it's always different. You don't know who you're going to see. You don't know if you're going to be in the same examination room. So getting ready and like making sure my eyeshadow matches my jumper it distracts me from the stress of going, I'm going to go and see a random person and tell them something intimate about myself, you know? It prepares me, I guess.
Do you think you've made any changes then once you've gained the knowledge? Do you think you've made any adaptations or changes that have helped you?
I think, I mean, I definitely have. I mean, one of my big things, because I feel like I get overwhelmed quite easily, and it doesn't even have to be that a situation that is that stressful. It can even be just coming in to the office can sometimes like knacker me, and no one's done anything wrong. It's just like me for whatever reason, and I've always been one of these people who has to nap during the day, and I've slowly realized that happens when I've felt overwhelmed. I have to just go and sleep, and I can't always sleep. Like usually my mind is racing, but just lying down and being comfortable. And I used to try and not let myself do that because everyone thinks napping is bad and that's lazy. But now I'm like, do you know what? I need to do this, or I'm not going to be able to carry on with the rest of the day. So now I will let myself sleep.
So we had an adult client a few months back who said exactly the same, feeling really, really guilty. And what we found was that he was like a Duracell battery, but once it was dead, it was dead. He needed to have sleep, and sleep was the only thing that would revive him, the only thing. And he said, I love my sleep. I love my sleep. But naturally, people say, well, that's not normal. Why are you doing that? You should be able to survive all day. Just out of interest, I wonder what the Spaniards would think of that, because what do they say every day, 365 days a year? Oh, this is siesta. It's a licensed opportunity to have a nap. And they did it for very practical reasons, but look how it benefits so many people. You have the energy to then go on a bit later in the day. So I think there's something quite powerful in that. Is there any other adaptations you've made?
God, I'm trying to think. I've just got to like kind of go back to what you've just said for a minute. It kind of made me think about like kids being in school, like the fact that they're expected to, go for all those hours,
All those hours,
especially any child, but then especially a child who has autism or ADHD. Like how do they expect them to actually get through a whole school day without having a sleep or like having downtime?
Yeah, it's quite challenging, isn't it? And then when you find that a young person who comes to me, one of the recommendations that I will immediately pick up on is, have you allowed for time to process? And people associate that time to process as being, well, yes, they get 25% extra time for exams. It's like, no. Time to process in the moment, but also time to process in the evening, i.e., no homework at home, time to process a day after a very big, heavy day where they're not expected to go into school because they need time to just decompress. And that is never factored in, not ever. But it's quite interesting how, when you think about your respective job roles now, how do you find the opportunities to kind of look after yourself with that, knowing the knowledge you have? So like, I know for Yasmin, don't expect Yasmin to get up before 10 a.m. unless it's really like a one-off in a week, because she just won't function.
I
But
go to bed early and I still can't. And I wake up to my alarms and I'm like, I'm awake. And then something happens and I'm just, you know, and I try
yeah,
really hard. I try so hard. I set multiple alarms to the point that I'm like, oh God, I hope you're not having a session next door because I'll just hear my alarm going off. And it's like, I'm not ready yet. Come back later.
no, I think the thing is, your best working time is definitely sort of like afternoon. But once you recognize that and you work with it, you find it's much easier, because then if you don't put the pressure there that you need to be starting work at 9 o'clock, if you're still working at 7 o'clock at night or at 9 o'clock at night, who cares? The productivity is much better if left to kind of just work out what is your natural body rhythm to support your autism and ADHD. And for you, Samara, we've seen you working late hours. It's just what we have to work with, but then at least it alleviates that pressure, whereas a lot of employers expect you in at a certain time and expect you to finish at a certain time and expect Monday to Friday. And I can't think of anything worse for those on the autistic spectrum. That conformity just doesn't lend itself, does it really?
Mm.
Go on, Yasmin, you were going to say, sorry.
I wondered if anybody else finds that they get tired, even if it's something they're really interested in. Because I went to the track last weekend and I got through the first 4 hours really fine. And then the 5th hour started coming and I was like, I'm really tired. I'm going to fall asleep here. And I was like, but I don't want to leave because A, I want to prove a point that I was going to spend all day there. 2, I didn't want to miss anything, but I'm yawning here. I'm regularly yawning and people are looking at me and I'm like, I can't quite nap on a picnic table in public, but because I tried that TikTok trend of doing the Navy SEAL 8-minute nap. If you can do that, congratulations, because I went for an 8-minute nap. It was 6 hours. I woke up and I was like, what year is it? I don't know where I am. What's happened? And you were downstairs and you went, are you okay? And I was like, I've just had an entire experience. It was supposed to be 8 minutes. Everyone's like, oh yeah, your body naturally wakes up after 8 minutes. It's well rested. No?
Sophie's put in, she's kinder to herself now. She can recognise when she's burnt out and needs a rest. If I can't do something because it will overwhelm me, I don't beat myself up. I just acknowledge it and move on, which for me, yes, that's been a major thing. But also, she says, if I do, it's a special interest of mine. I put all my energy into it and then get burnt out, overwhelmed, or just exhausted. And then says, me and Albie had a 5-hour nap the other day. We were meant to have half an hour. There you go. You're not on your own, Yasmin. There are other people similar. What's the biggest thing then you think you've found since you've kind of had an understanding around your autism? What's the biggest thing that really sits and resonates with you that's been a bonus?
Well, what do you mean by bonus?
Well,
I haven't gained a superpower, but go on. I'm not quite sure what you mean by a bonus.
I think for me, the biggest thing that I no longer feel, I think the question I used to ask myself when I was sort of like 9, 10, going through to 21 is, what is wrong with me? That constant soul searching, what's wrong with me? Do I have this? Do I have this? Do I have this? Now I know what I know, with so much better understanding, it's actually quite a relief to kind of go, oh, that makes so much sense. But because I now know, it gives me that opportunity to not say what's wrong with me. I know what's wrong and I know what I can do about it. And for the best will in the world, much as I love the idea of having loads of friends and going out and partying and, doing things that neurotypicals do, actually in those moments, if I was there, I would absolutely not survive. It's just not my environment that's conducive to my well-being. So it's that sheer relief that I don't need to go and ask myself what's wrong with me. There is nothing wrong with me. I'm okay. I just need to adapt my environment to provide me with good mental health well-being. So, you know, what do you guys feel? What's the bonus out of learning about autism?
I think very similar to what you've said, because I never thought that I would feel okay in my own skin. Like I never thought that I would accept myself fully, or and you know, it has taken all this time. It's only been like the last few months where I've finally been okay with myself. I've finally accepted me for who I am, and actually I see the positives of it. Like a lot of the things that make me like a good person, or like, you know, the hobbies I enjoy doing, you know. So it's not all a negative. I think if you look at like the negative side though, it almost did bring me like a sense of sadness as well, because there's a part of me that almost feels sorry for the young me who was
Yeah,
kind of lost in this world.
yeah,
And I know it sounds like really strange to talk about yourself in that way, but you kind of feel sad for that person who was just so misunderstood and struggled so much with life. Like that's really sad, and you can't go back and change that, but at least going forward you can change that now.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, that's very powerful stuff, because again, quite often when I talk with my clients, I'm always reminding them of the little person within them, because that little person never goes away. There's always the internal child. And it's really important that we acknowledge that some of those fears within that inner child is still there. But again, with adult understanding, we can begin to support and repair some of that damage. If you don't know what's wrong, how can you begin to repair? And also, I think it's really important that we do feel incredibly compassionate towards the inner child, because where were the adults around us who could have protected us and should have protected us and advocated and supported? Where were they? Because sometimes we place too much dependence on our adults to advocate, when in actual fact they're useless, or worse, adding to the problems. You know, even though in blind faith we assume that adults know best until we get to sort of like 8, 9, 10 or 11 and begin to realize that adults don't necessarily know the best, but there are some adults who will insist they're right, the child's wrong.
Yeah, I think as well, I think there's a lot of parents who they'll only accept that there's something not wrong with their child, but something different if it's something that is treatable and will go away. And you know, if you're diagnosed with autism, ADHD, that's not going away, and there's no pill that's going to get rid of that. No matter what medication they might try and throw at you, that's still you. And I think that is what a lot of parents struggle to come to terms with, and that's from like personal experience. My family took all the mental health diagnoses that came towards me. They didn't do anything about it, but that was more acceptable than someone saying, "Oh, you might be autistic or you might have ADHD." That was a no, definitely not.
Yeah. Yasmin?
I am clearly not on the same level as you guys, because I regularly say what's wrong with you to myself.
Oh.
It's not so much like what's wrong with you. It's just like sometimes you're like, seriously, what is wrong with you? Why have you just done that's 24/7 in my brain. Sorry about that. You know, so everyone's going here. There's nothing wrong with. There is something wrong with me. It's not like official. It's not. It's not like something I've been diagnosed with. There is just something slight. You know. But also, I don't know if since having an official diagnosis, I've gained anything. If anything, like I've irritated myself, because when I was younger, it was like, oh, Yasmin won't eat from this specific fork. Oh, what a weird little quirk. And now I'm like, if I get into a relationship with somebody, how do I say, this is my mug, don't touch it because your lip's going on it. Can't use that mug anymore. You've ruined it for me. I can't do that. So it's given me more stress of like things that used to be quirky as a kid that you did. They're now not quirky anymore. And it's like, you know, you live or die by my kitchen rules, okay? We're not playing with this. You constantly do my washing up wrong, and I keep saying to you, and you go, you've never told me that before. And I'm like, I'm going to be sending you a PowerPoint of this fork, because you put the pet forks with the human forks, and then I have to wash them all over again because it's touched it. So, you know, I've just given myself more stress. Like, I got really upset that the builder lost my builder's mug, so then I had to give them my Welsh Rugby Union mug, which I was never going to touch because I got it secondhand. But, you know, I'm giving you another mug now. And then you gave him the rabbit mug the other day, and I was like, I can't use that ever again now. Oh my God, she's ruined it for me. So you know, then I have people go, why do you have so many mugs? Because you
That'll
people
be
just
why.
hand them out. Like they mean nothing. See, yeah, I can't use little spoons. That's the thing.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's things like that. I can't do it. I can't use certain forks. There's a fork set you have at your house, and one of the forks, the little sticky bit, is slightly bent up more than the can't use it. Mm-mm. So, you know, I've just given myself more problems, really. It's like, if you want to date me, here's the list of things to not do wrong. If I do this, don't judge me.
It is quite intriguing because on the one hand, there is that relief of, okay, so there isn't something wrong with me, it's just that I'm autistic. But equally, you're arguing, Yasmin, now that you know, it's like, oh God. Right,
Yeah,
so
now it's
there
like,
is the problem of being autistic and knowing that you're autistic, because actually it's, you know, do or die by my rules.
well, yeah, really.
No PDA there at all, really, is there?
It's fine because it's like when people say, you know, I don't like mushrooms. Oh, you just haven't grown to like them yet. And it's like, no, I don't like mushrooms. Don't even try and put them in something that I'm, you know, and people go, oh, you're just being silly, just pick them out. I can't pick them out because my autistic brain is saying, it's touched my food. I can't eat that now. You've contaminated it. What is wrong with you people? So it just gives me more stress, and I get so nervous because I've had a friend say, I'll come over and make breakfast for you. Please don't. I don't know what your cooking style is like. I don't want to risk it. I'll do it myself. You know, and I get so stressed about it.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, if somebody said to me, I can't trust your cooking, I'd be really upset. So it's really bad.
Sophie's also identified she can't use pattern mugs or plates. That's also an intriguing one, isn't it?
See, that's when I say, what's wrong with you? Because I know it's like a really logical thing, but it's like, oh no, I can't bring myself to do it.
We could talk forever about different quirks, couldn't we? But I suppose the main thing today is just that understanding is, you know, has it been useful in thinking about, actually, we know the answer now. Has it been allowing us that understanding of, okay, if we know what it is, we can deal with it, you know, and if we can deal with it, does that mean, Samara, then that you no longer have to drink alcohol before you go out the door? Or does it mean that actually you can drink less alcohol, knowing that actually you don't have to go out the door every time to go and socialize, because, you know, we're more two-man tent people than go out party style? I don't know, you know, what do you think?
I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't really drink before I go out now because I'm like, well, one, you get to a point where you're like, I'm sick of feeling ill after drinking, so you don't want to get too drunk. And now I'm like, I need to eat a meal before I have a drink. Obviously, becoming sensible in my old age. But yeah, I don't feel like I need it as much now because I'm a lot more open. You know, I was invited to go and do something the other day. And at first, out of like habit, I was like, oh yeah, I'll do that because I can't really say no to people. And then about half an hour later, I just thought, you know what am I doing? And I just messaged and said, I literally have no social battery left, so no, I'm not coming.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really quite empowering, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
you're just recognizing I can't do this. This is just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any last sort of like suggestions for anybody who's kind of just going through that process now? You know, would you say definitely recommend going through it, or would you say no, it's fine, just, you know, you don't need to do it? What would you recommend?
If you need it, like you need it written on paper for school, whatever, work, then go for it. If you're wondering if you have it, go for it. But if you know you have it, because you know it's very obvious and you don't feel the need to have it written on paper, don't bother with it, because it's just confusing. And you know, wait a couple of years, they might finally come out with an up-to-date one that doesn't sound like it was written in the 1940s. So you know, just wait a bit.
Samara?
I mean, I would always say to people to go for it, really, because if you're anything like me, even if you think that you might have something, there's always doubt, and then you still don't really allow yourself like what you need because there's a little bit of doubt there. So I think it's always a good thing to just have it. It doesn't mean you need to tell anyone or like, you know, broadcast it, but just have it for yourself to understand yourself.
Mm. Okay, lovely. Thank you. So I guess that means that I can plug the M word then quite happily. For and against, if you need to know and you want to understand a bit better, you can always come to the M word. We will always be happy to help you with a mental health assessment and then an initial screening to identify whether there are indicators flagged or raised in the mental health assessment that suggest that an initial screening is warranted to support whether you have autism, ADHD, and PDA. We are very happy to do that, whether you're a young person or whether you're an adult. And from my personal perspective, I suppose I left CAMS very much to try and provide that gap in the market because we were just failing our families so badly. And what I really wanted to do was be very proactive in about how do we improve our mental health if it means the difference between waiting 5 years for a diagnosis, or if it means the difference between cutting to the chase and just saying, right, this is the issues. We can learn about ourselves from an autistic perspective and make your mental health improve really swiftly. This is the way to do it. And that's where we are today, really, isn't it? So anyway, thank you so much to both of you for joining me. Next week, I believe, will be our last week of Unearthing. We are going to be talking about, hopefully, Samara and Yasmin going forward with their new plan. So if you want to know what's going to be happening on the M word emotional problem solving front, I suggest you pitch up and find out what these lovely young ladies have got in store for us going forward. So next week, Wednesday, 12:15, be here and we'll talk to you more about it. Thank you for joining us today and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.